What is up, everybody? It is me, Duke Farley, back at it again here on Lost at Sea, and we are talking a little Ascendance Live Season 2. I am joined this evening by the seventh person eliminated from Season 2, I believe.
I think
Paul,
so.
think so. I believe 12th place, maybe 11, I think 12th place. So,
hmm
Paul, thank you for joining me. How are you? What's been
Yeah,
up?
doing well, doing well. Just been enjoying watching everything play out. It's like I was there, but there's so much you don't know when you till you watch it back. So it's been a very interesting experience.
Yeah, I can imagine it'll be seeing all the different angles of what the hell is going on and some of the rooms that you weren't in is kind of fun. Um, Paul, you were one of the people going into the season that I was super like interested to see because I had no idea who you were. So I wanted to ask you first off, how did you find, this game and what made you apply in general?
This is actually a really funny question because it's a question I was getting in the house all the time. Because I not only had I never played Ascendance, but I haven't played an online game in probably about 10 years, maybe. So I sort of come at this through the College Survivor. I'm kind of a big College Survivor fan. Michigan, Maryland, Ohio State, all that stuff. And so had done that, had played one live game prior, and then the truth is, I think it showed up like in my Instagram suggested or something, Ascendance. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So clicked on it, watched season one, loved it. Thought the format was super interesting, thought the way it was done was super interesting. And I'm like not super outdoorsy, just to be totally honest. So as much as I like playing like live survivor games and that whole thing, like being outside, like I play those games despite the outside stuff, not because of it. So I was like, Ascendance is like all of the fun of that. Great challenges, great twists, great game, and you get to be like inside a nice house. Like, sign me up. So I sort of just applied on a whim. Did my interviews. It was actually funny. I was just talking with Nicole this week. She was like, you like, we had no idea who you were when you applied. And they were like, okay. And then she was like, we interviewed you and you were like, oh yeah, we got to cast him. And I was like, oh, that's so kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so what it ended up being was kind of like you've seen in the episodes, like I was kind of perceived as this wild card outsider because I believe I was the only person in the game who didn't know a single person going in and had zero connections. Like never played an online game with any of these people, no mutual friends, no I was had no Facebook friends in the house, no Instagram mutuals, like nothing. Like these were all total strangers to me. So it was totally a wild ride, but because of that, I came out with all these new friends that I never would have met had I not done this game specifically.
Yeah, it's interesting, you coming in from that perspective of not knowing anyone, and only have, seen the first season. A couple questions I have are, was this the what you viewed on season one similar to what you expected or what you got this season? Or do you think that was there anything different from from that perspective?
Um, I felt like kind of like the format and like, okay, captain's challenges, then team challenges, then like that kind of stuff was good. But like as far as the gameplay, I feel like our cast played a very different game than the season one cast played. In that kind of like you've been seeing, like there weren't a lot of like big alliances of like this is R6. There was like no duckies, wasn't happening. Like none of that was really going on. And like a lot of the stuff that was going on really up until the Melissa boot and then my boot was like very going on behind closed doors. Like who's friends with who's working with who, like was very up in the air. So that was why when Melissa got voted out, you can see that there was like a lot of people like, I don't want to vote out Melissa, but everybody was so like, I don't know who to trust. I don't know who I can go to, who I can talk to about this. So it never really ended up coming together for that reason. So I think that was probably the big difference between season 1 and season 2 game wise that I kind of wasn't ready for, was that this was just a total chaotic first lots of rounds.
Absolutely. And then another thing that I wanted to ask you is, knowing nobody coming into this, is that like, do you think that that was an advantage for you? I've been asking a lot of people in these exit interviews, some of them not so connected, some of them more connections, and they kind of have been weighing it differently person to person. So I wanted to ask you, like, is that something you would have preferred to know more people, or was, having like a fresh slate, nobody knew who you were, kind of cool?
It was a mixed bag. Like it ended up being all right, like because I'm not eligible to get voted off until the balloons game is the first time I can receive votes. So I'm safe for the first 3 rounds. I think it's at least the first 3 rounds I'm totally safe for. So if I had been vulnerable, like if we had lost the escape room or like the telephone game, I think I would have been in real trouble just because nobody really knew me. And so I think I would have been an easy boot. But because of the way my game shaped out, I think it ended up working out all right. The one disadvantage I had was there was a lot of people who knew kind of other people's playing styles. Like to say, like, oh, Kennedy plays this kind of game, and Keaton plays this kind of game, and Drew plays this kind of game. And I had none of that intel going in. So this is funny. So before I came, like, and I didn't even really totally realize Ascendance was an online game, like at all. And so because I was like, because like through the casting process, I started following like Papa and Nicole and stuff on social medias, and they were posting like Ascendance, like season 11 org is going on. And I'm like, excuse, like what? Like what is, so I'm like on the Ascendance like wiki, like looking at all these names of like all these people who've played the org. And I'm like, oh my God, some of these people like have like huge resumes. So I'm like, I should like memorize like a couple of these names so that like when I get to the house, if any of these people are there, like I'll know to like watch out for them. And the 2 people whose names I remembered, like that I was like, if they're there, like they're the tough people, were Duke and Jabbar. So
what a compliment, Paul. You come on my podcast and you compliment
absolutely
me.
That's why I'm here. And so like I'm like, okay. And so like I get out of the van and like one of the first people I see is Jabbar. And I'm like, oh, like here we go. And he's like, oh, it's so good to see you. Like he has no idea who the hell I am, like at all. And I'm like, hey, I'm Paul. He's like, hey, I'm Jabbar. Like I'm doing prod this season. I'm like, oh, okay. So like, okay, things are good here. Like, all right. And so those were the only 2 names I looked at going forward. But then like, it was so crazy to hear people talk about like their ascendants and all the relationships and stuff that they had from that. And so overall, I love it because I play games like this for the experience more necessarily than like the win-loss record. So like anytime I can go into a game and be like, I know none of these people like at all, like I know I'm going to go in and meet a bunch of really crazy people with like all sorts of different personalities. And so from that aspect, I loved it. Like, would it have been nice to kind of have a like someone in my pocket like that I knew before that I definitely wanted to play with? Absolutely. But it was just the way the cookie crumbled.
It was just the way that, just the way the cookie crumbled, like you said. But you did mention earlier in the first couple of team rounds, you were on teams that ended up winning. So would you say like those opening rounds were those teams that you were a part of were people that you were working with throughout like your course in the game? Like that original blue team has been brought up on a couple of these exit interviews. Was that something that was close, like as an alliance to you?
Yeah, that was what I wanted to do. Like that was my, because like I don't know like how much everybody has talked about like how long we were sequestered for the escape room game, but the blue team was in that basement area that you see shown all the time, people strategizing in. We were there for like 2.5 hours. Like we were the last people to play the escape room that day, and we were down there forever. So we like got to know each other. Like I got out, I brought phase 10. So we were sitting down there like playing phase 10, talking, getting to know each other. And I had already from like night one really vibed with Zoe, really vibed with Eric, and really vibed with HGC. So I was like, let's not overcomplicate this. Like I am perfectly happy with this group forever. Like I would be totally happy to go to the end with these people. I vibe with them, loved them, especially because going into an escape room challenge, I was like, okay, like if I can't win this, like maybe I deserve to go home. Like I'm a big escape room guy. Like that's kind of like not just like to do them, but that's really my skill set is like puzzles and stuff like that. And we've been talking, and like there were several other people on that blue team who were like, oh yeah, we're big escape room people, like whatever. And so I was like, if we can't do this, like okay, well whatever. And so I was really feeling that. And then it was that very next round when Eric went, and I was like, oh, like okay, like maybe not everyone is feeling the same way, because I was like, not only did Eric go, but I had sort of heard through the rumor mill that Zoe was really kind of like pushing for Eric in that boot. So I was like, oh, okay, like not everybody is playing the blue team game. So like that was when I was like, okay, I'm taking off of that. But like I was still like super close with Zoe, super close with HGC. Like they were at that point in the game, they were the two people I felt absolute closest to. So I was like, I'm going to kind of ride this out as best I can, but also keep in the back of my mind that probably not everyone is thinking the same way I am, like about this. Like, again, not knowing that people knew of Eric before the game and that Eric is like, you know, considered a threat, like in some of these situations that I didn't know. Like, I loved him. I was like, oh, he's like fun. He's friendly. Like, I love this dude. Like, not knowing that he had something of a reputation, and like a lot of these people did.
You mentioned HGC, and I wanted to talk about your game relationship with HGC. It was brought up on one of my recaps, I think with Scott a couple weeks ago, that it seemed like we never thought that this was going to be the duo that happened, Paul and HGC working together. How was it to just like work with HGC? You mentioned him being one of your close allies. He's a very fun character on the show. So
he's amazing.
Like? Yeah.
Like, let's just start there. He's amazing. And like I said, I'm so much about these games for the experience. And like a big part of that is like working with people you want to spend 4 days with. Like, you know, I'm like one of the early boots, and that happened on day 3. So like we spent a lot of time together, and like we're together. Right. And so a big part of it for me was like, I want to make sure I'm planning on going deep in the game with people I want to spend a lot of time with and I enjoy being around. And he was like right at or near the top of that list. Like he's so funny, like personality larger than life, but also like a truly genuine dude. Like when you get to know him, like sweet, like genuine, real. And beyond that, strategically, I felt like he and I were thinking the same way. Like, because you saw that conversation we had on the porch. Like, that was not the only one of those, like, quick pull aside, let's talk for like 30 seconds. Like, what's best for us? What should we do? This is it. Okay, let's do it. Whereas with other people, sometimes it was a little bit more like, well, what do you think? What do you know? And HGC was one of the people in the house that you could go to and be like, what should we do? What's the best move? This is the best move. Lock it in. Let's do it and be done. And so I think it was a combination of that connection of like anybody who meets him is like immediately connected to him. And then me strategically being like, this is the kind of person I want to play with. It's really funny. I like was also a little distrustful of him because he has that great personality. I was in the back of my mind, always had that voice like, okay, don't be like Charmed because he's like the funny, sweet guy. Like, don't fall for it. Like, and so I was always like, is he like being like this with everybody? And then I sort of found out he was like, no, like I was loyal to you. I was like, oh, like I love you. Like, let's be friends forever, which is the status of our relationship now. Like, I was like, you know, we'll be friends forever. But yeah, so he's amazing. And yeah, so that was kind of the nature of our relationship Also, they don't touch on it a lot, but there was like definitely a weird age thing that I was feeling. I think I mentioned it in the premiere episode of like everyone's going around saying their ages, and I'm 32, which is not like old in reality, but like in Ascendance, like when everybody else is going around and saying their names, and like Carson and Kennedy are both like underage, like 19, I'm like, oh my god, like everybody's going around, and then
I
like
think you had a
that was
confessional, Paul, that was, I'm feeling very above 30 right now.
and I did. So part of that whole thing was like, I'm trying to find people with like a little bit more like energy that connects with the above 30ness. Now, HCC is not that old, but like in the context of Ascendance, he was a part of like the kind of a little bit older group, kind of with me and Melissa and Jake, and like a little bit more of the quote unquote like mature-ish, you know, not personality type wise, but like age wise people. So that was another aspect of it.
Yeah, that was a funny part of that opening episode. That was a confessional that I really liked. I wanted to dive into kind of like some of the rounds where that you mentioned earlier, kind of the Melissa round, because I feel like the opening rounds, you know, you were safe for a couple of them, and some of them were kind of like landslide votes between, you know, Christopher, Jake. Not that there wasn't some strategy behind that, but I think the Melissa vote, that round with the competition, the Animal Kingdom I forgot what that is. I keep forgetting that.
Yeah. I know it as food chain from the Genius. So that's what I call it.
Right, food chain. So there was a funny scene there in food chain, and I talked about it with Melissa last week.
Yes.
Where you go full kill mode on everybody. So just run through quickly like what you were trying to do, because I don't know if it's fully explained. Melissa kind of talked about it, but you were basically at that point trying to starve Melissa, right?
Yes. So in order to really understand the context of what happened, like you have to run back to the night before. So it's the overnight where they're showing the video all night. And like a part of the video is the episode of The Genius where they play Food Chain, was a part of our video. So like the full 90-minute episode. And I am one of maybe 2, maybe 3 people on the cast who's ever seen The Genius. So I'm like, I know this game. And the craziest part about it is I'm sitting on the couch next to Melissa, and we're like, through the whole thing, we're talking about food chain strategies of like, okay, so here's what you do if you're this character. Here's what you do if you're that character. Like, here's the different ways you can win. Here's the ways you can protect people you want to win. Here's the ways you can target people. Because like at that point, I wanted to work with her because I knew that the house was shifting to want to get her out. And I knew that that was bad for me because I wanted to keep Melissa in the house because I liked Melissa, and I wanted to keep Kennedy in the house because I really liked Kennedy, and I knew that they would keep going at each other. So I was like, I want to keep that going. So my strategy in the overnight was, let me work with Melissa. And then I end up drawing the coyote, I think it was, in our game, where the only win condition is the lion has to starve. So the only way I win food chain is if Melissa starves, which sucks. But also I was not at all feeling confident enough about my place in the game to where I could like let Melissa have it and hope that she protected me. Like I was not feeling that because I knew that my name had come up during the Christopher boot. Like people were telling me that, and HGC and Zoe specifically, who I really trusted, were like, your name's come up, like we're squashing it, but just so you know, it's out there. And I was like, my name had been out the round before, or 2 rounds before, like I don't feel good enough to be able to sacrifice. So at that point, I was like, I need to shift my thinking into, I need to be leading the anti-Melissa crusade. So I go outside for the first round, and like everybody's there. All the herd animals there. Thomas is there. I think Zoe's there. I think Kennedy's there. Like you can see there's like 8 people out there. And I'm like, okay, who is everybody? Like, and I just go into full like teacher dad mode Like, everyone tell me who you are. We're going to figure out how to win this game. All of us together. Bing, bang, boom. Let's do this. And so you can like, and you can see me in the episode, like they don't show a lot of it, but I'm like, everybody is standing around and I'm on the other side, like pointing, like I'm like directing traffic. Cause I'm like, I have to make sure Melissa starves. And so at that point, I'm thinking the best way to make sure Melissa starves is to make sure there's no food for her to eat in round 3 and 4. Like, that's the best way to do it. And so I'm like, okay, so I'm going to go to her habitat in the next round and I'm going to eat everything that's there. So that way, even if she eats me, it won't matter because there mathematically won't be enough food left for her in rounds 3 and 4 to survive. So I get into the room and it's Wes, Drew, Carson, Melissa, Erica, and me. And I'm like, this is perfect because I already know that Erica's the snake. So I know that if I eat her, I die. So I'm like, this is perfect. I can win this game in 30 seconds. I'll just eat Carson, Drew, Wes, and then go to eat Erica and I'll die. And then Melissa starves right now and the game's over. So I was like, I can end this game right now by myself, round 2, be the house hero who eliminated Melissa from the game. So everybody's like, oh, he's loyal. He does what he says. I was like, this is a win-win situation. And so they're like, okay, go. And in my personal defense, it hasn't been fully explained that you have to wait for them to be like, okay, such and such is dead, resume. Like, that was never explained. So I grab my clothespin and I go boom, boom, boom. And I'm running over to Erica and go boom. And like literally everyone, like all the players in the room are just looking at me like shocked. And then I think it's both Maddie and Papa are there. And they're just looking at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I just killed all of them. And then I ate Erica. And they're like, no, you didn't. They're like, you have to wait. And I was like, what? And so by that point, because Melissa's a smart enough player and because we've talked through strategies the night before sitting on the couch, she immediately is smart enough to figure out what I'm doing. I don't know that anybody else in the room necessarily figured out what I was doing, maybe not even until we were all in the pool house afterwards. So at that point, I'm like, okay, new strategy. So like I'm eating and then she starts coming for me. And so that's when you see the whole insanity of that moment. And like, I'm so uncoordinated. So like me, like running away, trying to dodge, like why I even thought that would be successful was not. And like, I'm all arms and legs. And so like, I just come across and I hit her. And like in that moment, you can see us both freeze. And I'm sitting there and I'm trying not to cry because I'm like, I just hit her. Like, I don't need to be the one who's having an emotional moment here, but like I am literally like sitting there like trying not to cry because it's like I said, it's day 3. So your emotions are already just like on 110%. You're so stressed, you're so nervous, you barely slept for 2 nights now. Like you're just on edge. And this has happened. So like that's why I'm like, you can hear me like I'm barely talking. I'm like, just like kill me. Like just like I'm done. Like just kill me. And so she kills me and like I beeline it out the door. And like as soon as that door shut and like I saw there were no cameras, I was just like, oh my God, like what did I just do? Like and like had a whole like moment as I was walking down to the pool house because it was just like the worst feeling. Like it was genuinely hard to watch it back. Like that whole day, like 2 Thursdays ago, I was like I don't want to watch this up. Like I don't want to be like I don't want to do like I don't want to be in the group chat tonight. Like I don't want to do because she could not have been nicer about it. Could not have been more gracious about it. Post game, every time we've talked since. But like I felt like absolute garbage. So yes, that was quite a moment.
Just an accident though, like
total accident, total freak moment of like craziness. But and especially because I really, until food chain started, I was not on the anti-Melissa train with everybody else. And so that sort of informed the way I played the rest of that round. Is I really did like that conversation you saw where I'm talking with Melissa in the living room is totally genuine. I wanted to save her, but the two things they didn't show is I was trying to tell her, you don't have the votes to get Carson. I said, you have the votes to get Wes. If you put the target onto Wes at this point, you tell people Wes's name, you can pick up votes. I was like, but I can't vote for Carson. At that point, Carson and I were very close. I was not going to vote for Carson to save Melissa. I absolutely would have voted for Wes to save Melissa, but not Carson. So I was really trying to get her to be like, okay, let's focus on Wes here. And then after that conversation, I go into the kitchen, and Drew and Erica are both there in the kitchen. And I look at them, I'm like, what are we doing? And they both look at me and they're like, Melissa. And so I'm like, well, if she doesn't even have Drew and Erica, which are the two people she's like, I absolutely have Drew and Erica and Taisha. If you don't have them, I can't stick my neck out for you. Like, I was like, I can't drum up votes if you don't even have your votes in line. I can't put my votes in line to save you. And that was when I was like, okay, this is pretty much over. I was not privy to the entire conversation that was happening in the basement during that, which was them all trying to find votes to save Melissa. But like, as you can see, they never mentioned my name. Like, they're never like, somebody needs to talk to Paul and try and get his vote. I don't know why I wasn't brought. Again, I think it goes maybe into the little bit of the wild card thing. And I know at that point, Drew did not trust me because he was one of the people at that point that I had never really had strategic conversations with, never worked with on any level. In fact, if he had been eligible for that vote, I would have really been trying to push him to be the person voted out that round. And the round I go out, if Carson and I had already talked about it before the game, like, if we win captains, we'll split Drew and Erica onto two different teams and we'll get one of them. Like, whichever team loses, that's who we'll target. So like, I get it from that perspective, and that's why I get everything that happened after it from that perspective. But it just would have been nice because it would have been much better to have Melissa in the game at that point than almost anybody else at that stage, but especially Wes.
Right. So it does seem like Erica was a deciding factor in ultimately putting her foot down and sending Melissa home there. It seemed like there was that group that was debating, keeping her in the game as a number and going after, I think, Marvin or Carson there. I do want to ask you about something that you said in your voting confessional during that vote where you throw your hinky vote onto Marvin. You said something and then you're like, look it up. What did you say and what does it mean?
So I'm talking about Chekhov's gun, which would have made, like, the whole thing would have made 1,000% more sense. So I played one live game before this, but it hasn't aired. And so you don't see yourself play games. And so in your own mind, you're the main character of every game you play, right? It's like all about you. So the whole time I'm there, every time a round comes out where there's hinky votes, I go out of my way to be like, I hate people who throw hinky votes. I don't play the game that way. I hate that stuff, blah, blah, blah. Like, trying to set it up so later in the game, when I feel it's advantageous, I can throw votes onto people and not have them know who it comes from. And Marvin was somebody at that point who I liked, but I wasn't 100% close with. Like, I liked him. I wanted to play with him. And I also thought that he was getting some of the votes at that point. So I was like, I want to make sure if he gets one vote, okay. But if he gets like 3 votes, that's going to really mess with his head and really tie him to people like me who he feels like he can trust. And so my whole thing was, so Chekhov's gun is like a theater nerd thing. It's a rule in theater where if you see a gun in the first act of a play, it has to be fired by the time the play closes. So my whole thought is, if you spend your whole time telling people you don't throw hinky votes, you have to throw a hinky vote at some point. That's just theater. Okay. Not knowing that they wouldn't show, a day and a half of me having those conversations, and I would just look like an absolute lunatic in the voting confessional. So yes. So that's A, the weird reference I make, and B, like, why I did that was because I really wanted to try and tie this group together of me, Marvin, Kennedy, HEC, Carson, Zoe, like that group. I was like, this is because it's a hybrid of blue team people and then people who I connected with night one. And I was like, this can be a spot for me to really bulldoze going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting the people that you named, because we're going to be diving into, the round that you're eliminated here. Zoe being a person that I'm interested to know that you were that very, very close with. I think this episode displays that because she's super like not wanting to vote you out, despite, her alliance wanting to. So we kind of see that relationship that you built there with Zoe really put into play here. Were you, I guess, post your elimination, looking at the episodes now, were you surprised to see Zoe a part of an alliance that wasn't, aligned with you?
We connected night one on a personal level. And I was like, oh, like, I love her. Like, I was like, I love Zoe. Like, I love this person. So that was part of my own like emotional blindness to be like, Zoe would never vote me off. Like she would never ever do that. Even though looking back, she was basically all but telling me she was voting off, but doing everything except for actually saying the words. But I couldn't pick up on it because I loved her so much and had so much confidence in our relationship. At that point in the game, she was my absolute number one. Like over HGC, over Carson, like I was ready to sit at the end with Zoe 100% at that point. And I know that she did feel that way about me, but she had this group that she felt like was protecting her and she was with, that she didn't feel like she could turn on because she had kind of had that earlier thing with Kennedy a little bit. So I knew she didn't fully trust Kennedy. I knew she didn't fully trust Marvin. I didn't really know the status for relationships with Carson and HGC. So I was kind of trying to like bring her into that group, not knowing she already had something that she felt way better about on the outside. But I was totally blindsided and shocked. Also, Wes had shaken my hand. Like he talks about, like, he shook my hand that round and said, I absolutely will not vote for you. And he said, I haven't said this to anybody yet in the game. And apparently he really hadn't said, I'm shaking your hand. I'm telling you, I will not vote for you. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I'm totally solid. Because you have to remember, Drew hasn't told anybody at this point that he's voting. So none of us know. So I'm like, everybody's kind of running around and all this is happening. And I'm kind of like, I have Marvin, Kennedy, and Zoe 100%. And I have Wes, who I feel pretty good about. So I'm kind of like, I don't want to be cocky, but like, that's why you don't really see me scramble all that much in my boot episode. Because I'm kind of like, okay, Jodely votes for me. Thomas may or may not vote for me. I don't really know. But I'm like, I have 5 votes. I'm good. And so then Drew joins the vote, right? And I'm like, oh, weird. But he's like, I think this is the last time I can use it. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, that's weird. Like, why would you put a target like that on yourself? And then as the voting is going on, I'm seeing Zoe out of the corner of my eye and she's like emotional. And I'm like, well, that's not a good sign. Like, you never want to see somebody you're really close with, like, going into the voting confessional looking like they're about to cry. It's probably a bad sign for where I'm at. And so that was when everything started to like slow motion car crash for me, like while we're getting up and getting ready to vote. And I'm like, no, wait, like I need 5 more minutes to strategize. Like I can flip this again, like if I have 5 more minutes to strategize. But obviously at that point, the die is totally cast. Everything is done. And I'm like, oh no. And that's like you can see me like disheveled in the voting confessional because like I realized like 30 seconds prior that I think I'm about to get voted out, but I'm still running the numbers in my head and I'm thinking, okay, I trust Kennedy. Like Kennedy doesn't have really any reason to lie to me because she's totally safe. And I've seen her look at people and be like, I'm sorry, I have to vote for you tonight. Like I saw her do that several rounds where she was safe. So I'm like if it's me, there'd be no reason for her to try and blindside me here. Like none. And so I was like, okay, like running the numbers in my head, I'm like, are we gonna tie here? Like, is it gonna be 4-4? What's going on? And then that realization when that last vote, when that those last two votes come out, like, oh, it's gonna be me, like, ouch, like that really, really hurts.
So I was going to ask you about, kind of did Drew playing the power kind of, I guess, spark some spidey senses, and it seems like it kind of did amongst, Zoe's reaction prior to voting or during the voting process. I want to go back into the beginning of the round where Marvin and Kennedy they win captain.
Yeah.
And you have a confessional where you're like, Kennedy pulls me aside and she said that, she splits me and Carson up on teams with Marvin to keep you guys safe.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of are, like, that's not great. So kind of talk through, how you felt about that. Like, obviously you would prefer to be on the same team, so you would be voting with Carson,
yeah.
right?
Totally. I would have to be on there with Carson or HGC would have been great. Especially, but at that point, I was more concerned for Carson than I was for myself. I was like, keep me with Carson so I can protect him, not the other way around, because I felt like I'm with Zoe. I'm good there. Like, but it was a catch-22 because while the tribe divisions were terrible, and I genuinely feel like I probably survive any other combination of teams except that specific one I get put on that round. Because if HGC is there, if Carson is there, even if like Taisha and I were like didn't have an alliance, but we vibed from moment one. Like, how you meet somebody and you're like, you're cool. Like, I felt that way about her from Jumpstart. So I was like, even if Taisha's here, I feel like I can maybe work her. It was that specific combination of people with Drew added into it that I was like, I can't win. But I was still feeling okay because several times you see me get picked at the end or near the end of the lineup, especially early on. And so when Kennedy picks me first, I'm like, okay, like cool, like somebody feels good about me, like awesome. And it really was one of those things where I believe, Ascendance happens so fast and the live game happens so fast that it's so easy in retrospect to look back and be like, well, if you had picked the teams exactly this way and put these 4 people here and these 3 people here, and it's like, well, yeah, that's totally true. But what you don't see is like that challenge finishes and we walk to the house, sit down, and they pick teams. So it's not even like there was like, time. Like Kennedy pulls me aside and tells me that after the teams are picked, like afterwards. It's not before, because the only time we had is that walk from the driveway into the house for the 2 of them to figure out what was going on. So like, I can't blame them. Is it their fault? Absolutely. 100% their fault. But I can't blame them because like, if Carson and I would have won that, we could have picked just as terrible teams for them. You just don't know what would have happened. Of course, I never got to be captain, so I literally don't know what would have happened if I had ever been captain. But that aside, you just don't know. But it definitely came down to a combination of the tribe or the team draw and Drew, who like came out of nowhere this episode kind of and seized a lot of power kind of and got to vote out. Like I said, Drew was probably the single person in the house I had the least connection with. because even like though I wasn't really working with Erica, we had conversations, and Erica is also somebody that is so cool and like a fantastic person. And like there were times at the house. So I'm also, because I'm contractually obligated, I have to bring up Balloon Gate once on the podcast. It was a part of the contract I signed with Nicole that I have to bring it up. So when that whole conversation is going on downstairs and you see all those people talking, Erica and I are upstairs at the bar eating, I think, cheese snacks at that point. Like, and people kept coming upstairs being like, everybody's talking about the balloons. And like, I don't remember if it was me or both of us being like, we're good. We're chilling. Like, we're fine. We don't need to rehash that. And so it wasn't even a strategic conversation. It was literally both of us being like, I can't do this right now. Like I don't have the emotional energy to do this one more time. And so we just didn't, and it never blossomed. There was no strategic relationship there. It was nothing more than two people sitting on bar stools, having a late night snack, just being absolutely over all of it. So like Erica she's a delight, and I'm glad I got to put that in there. But yeah, so at that point, Drew was the person I was absolutely furthest with from the game. So for him to be able to eliminate somebody that he had no connection with was brilliant on his part.
Yep, and he effectively, I guess, plays that power to join the vote, ultimately sends you home. I believe the final vote there is 5-3. And you are off to the pre-jury house. But Paul, I think we've covered a lot with your game up to this point, but is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about? I know that you got the hashtag BalloonGate in there contractually,
yes,
but
contractually.
Is there anything else?
I think the one thing I really wanted to bring up is the absolute lunacy of the experience that is Ascendance Live. Like, it is so bananas to play any live game, but to play a game like Ascendance that moves so fast and the teams are always shifting, it is such a wild experience that like you walk away from it like needing to decompress. And I mean that like in a good way. Like it's like if you play Ascendance, you've been through something. Like you have experienced something. And so like some of my favorite memories come from the post game, like of just spending time with people, like spending time in the pre-jury house. And then after the game is over, when all is said and done, just hanging out with everybody, like beginning to end, pre-jury, jury, everybody hanging out together, just having an absolute blast because we've just all been through this wild experience. So like, I guess the big thing I wanted to say is like, if you get a chance to apply for Ascendance Live, like do it. Like, don't hesitate, do it, apply. But B, like, understand that it's not like every other game you're going to play, even like other live games you're going to play. Like, it feels like you're on reality television. Like, it feels like you're on CBS. Like, it is an absolutely nutty experience. You go a little crazy. Like, you see me underneath the grill, like, looking for powers. And I think I want to say it's Stephanie from season 1 who's filming and like trying not to shake the camera because she's laughing at me so hard. And I'm like doing this whole rant and monologue about how annoyed I am with the season 1 people who are on production for season 2. Because I'm like, you guys couldn't trip without finding a power. If you guys sneezed and reached into the Kleenex box, there was a power hidden in there. You guys found everything 30 seconds into the game. And here we are crawling around on our hands and knees, doing all this stuff, and nobody can find a friggin' power in the entire house. Because of course, at that point, nobody I was close with had a power. And Marvin only gets that half pendant like the night before. So like I didn't know about either of his half pendants. And so I just was on this whole rant, but and she was just cracking up behind the camera. But because you get into this like loony CBS, NBC, ABC, like you're on reality TV experience. So it was so much fun. I'm trying to think, do I have any good tea from the post game to spill? Everybody was just so much fun. Like, and the times we had together and the nights we spent together, they were just insane and just wild and just like people like laughing so hard they're crying and playing big. Like you would think you get voted out of Ascendance, you don't want to play more games. Oh no, all we did was play games and run around and have fun. And like the crew was amazing. Like they were so good. Like they all like the running hospitality, they did such a great job, but then also just like hugging us after we got voted out and being like, I understand, like it sucks. Like I'm like, yeah, it does. And like all of that, like everybody involved with the show was just such good people that it 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 made it an authentic experience that was also filled with really wonderful and brilliant people. And I can't say enough good things about my experience. And second chances win. I feel like put me on a second chances ballot. I need to get back in there. I need to finally find a power. I need to finally win a captainship. Call me Ascendant second chances. That's all. That's my final note.
Hashtag Paul for second chances.
Get it trending.
Get it trending.
Even better than Balloon Gate.
I don't know. That's gonna be tough.
We'll see. Yeah.
But Paul, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was a lot of fun watching you this season. I will say you were definitely one of the people that I was most like surprised on. As I don't know how to word this, but my expectation for you, as opposed to what you brought, was you killed it basically. So
valid. Thank you. I appreciate the compliment.
But thank you so much again, Paul, for coming on. And this interview, if you're watching now, is Tuesday. So a new episode coming on Thursday. So check it out, and we'll see if jury begins then. So we'll see.
We'll see.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. Have a good one.